Hello and welcome to this week's video. This week's video is the last video um, that puts you up to the midterm. We'll be covering chapters 13 through 15 this week. I'm wearing this just again promoting mask use in light of recent news. And then also I have this on and I'll explain later. All right. So let's get right into it. Chapters 13 through 15. But here's the thing, chapters 13 and 14 are very small. It's chapter 15 is what we want to be concerned about. So let's get into chapters 13, 14 real quick. And it's just actually stuff you already know. Chapter 13 and 14 are just stuff that sets you up. It's your introduction and your conclusion. Go to pages and read what other little stuff I put in there. I put in the fact that you should be looking at the term signposts in respect to your introduction and conclusion. You already know this stuff. The terms that they use in the chapter comparative to the ones that you use in your outline. The most important term on here is rhetorical question. We already discussed credibility before, but rhetorical question is a great way to gauge your audience because you don't expect an answer with the rhetorical question, but you look at their nonverbals. And antidote leads into chapter 15, but it's an important term, so keep that in mind. It's introductory techniques, anecdote, fact, quotation, personal references, and events. And I mentioned that conclusion is your introduction in reverse. You already know this stuff, so don't stress about it. Look up the terms, go over the chapters to get ready for your midterm. All right, these are the most important parts of it. The matchup, in case you happen to get the old edition of the book, which I officially did not tell you to do that. Anyways, save money. So let's get into the next one, chapter 15. Chapter 15 is a huge one. It's probably the biggest chapter in the sense of terms and sense of terms for your test. It's divided into two slides, and look at the pages. You'll see the content for chapter 15 is quite large. The terms in here are very important. So let's get right into it. First off, there's the obvious. The oral language is different. Anytime you see in my slides of verses, that means there's a conflict there. And the oral language is different than the written language in the sense of presentation. You tend to be less formal in the oral. Your word choices are different. Even your recognition of some terms. I use the example of gender. It might be a little bit more informal. As I always say that I always slip with my tongue, and I always say guys, like hey you guys, as always, just a reminder, if they said it in Goonies, it's gender neutral. All right. So anyways, that's an old 80s movie reference. Sorry for the people who don't know that movie. Go watch it. Anyways, we know that the when we talk to each other, it is less formal and so forth. But it's important to note this. But you have to be of fearful of going too far in that formality. That's the big problem we have in our society when it comes to talking in general. The way we text each other, the way we text each other is so informal and shorthand and so forth that we tend to use that in our everyday language. And we are now seeing it in presentations and in job interviews. You need to know that there's limits to the informal nature. Don't TMI, information, just be mindful of that. Okay. We recognize the difference. Just be mindful not to go down the slippery slope. Okay. It's two terms you need to know: denotation, connotation. Very important. You might have heard those terms before. Denotation, very basic, which is the idea of using words that's their definite meaning. Your book does a great example, and I'm going to leave it up to you to read the example of the word notorious. And connotation is the definition in relation to experiences, and I also add in society's definition. The classic example I always like to use is the word bad from 1980 and 1990 movies, where bad in the denotation means awful, means horrible, and so forth. Not good, bad. And then in the connotation during that time is that that it is good, but and it's good in like an extreme way, or outlandish way. It's bad, it's so bad that it's good. That's the connotation meaning of that. And you've seen that all through society. They have regionalism, ethnic vernacular. The one term I want you to remember is jargon. Jargon's very important. You're going to get a question uh, on this word, and it's simple. Don't use jargon in public speaking. Jargon is when you talk to each other and you know the terms. You know each other, you know the terms. It's like the IT department, the computer department of any company. They talk to each other in their language. When they then go talk to somebody explaining the computer problem, they stay in their jargon. They're not going to get over to the person they're talking to what's wrong. If they're using the jargon they use with each other, but to the unfamiliar. If you ever use jargon in a speech, you have to define it. Don't use it. And I'll say this, and I always call out my colleagues in my field in education. I think a big problem we have is we talk to each other in all these different terms and so forth, mission statements and student learning outcomes and stuff like that, which are, it's understandable when they're defined, but we talk to, sometimes I've heard instructors talk to their students and the jargon we use, like the students already know what it is. Be mindful of that. I had an excellent example in a class I taught years ago, and I mentioned the term genocide. And the students, this was a high school class, and most of the students didn't know what the term meant, because when they learned about that in their history class, it was only referred to as the Holocaust. And international relations background, was talking like I was talking to folks who knew that term regularly. You have to be familiar, and you have to understand that what you're familiar with might not necessarily be familiar with the general public. Avoid jargon. Don't use jargon in speeches. All right. Um, I went too long on that one. So let's go into I'm going to stop share because I'm going to use my whiteboard on this. I know I have a whiteboard with Zoom, but I don't like it. All right. This is a lecture thing, so you might see this question in the lecture part, but this is introduced here, and it's important to understand this, and that is the abstract to concrete language spectrum. And that idea is simple. And you can Google it, and there's charts and so forth, even though when I was looking at it, the pictures weren't that great. You get into math terms if you're not careful. But abstract to concrete in word language and language style usage is a simple idea. It is when it's abstract, the possibilities are wide. From here to here, it can encompass everything. When it's concrete, it is very specific and narrowed. And so the spectrum is a pretty basic one, which is the abstract down to the concrete example. And so to give you a classic example, which I used in your pages, is the term education. If I refer to education in general, the generalized term, that's considered abstract. It's not defined. You can say, oh, it's when we're talking about issues, you can talk about economics and so. Hold your horses. I'm talking in the general sense of education, general. And then we get down to here, and then we get down to community colleges. And then we get down to here, we get into communication studies, the department. And then we get down to here to public speaking course, we get into your class. See how that works? When you're talking about in general issue, like I mentioned economics. If you're, by the way, taking an economics course, these are terms you might have to use. And then you talk about macro macroeconomics, which means economics in the large scale. So the general term economics, go down to macroeconomics. Then we talk about governing systems, economic systems, and then we talk about socialism, capitalism. See how that works? We talk about environmental issues, climate change, um, the pollution, and then the air. It gets into abstract, large. I'm not good at this. I'm so used to the classroom. Anyways, abstract, large, and it goes down. And so if you just remember this little simple diagram, I know it's not that great. I should have probably made the concrete a little bit more narrow. But if you remember that, and you want to avoid that, you want to avoid generalizations too much. You could talk about the field of education, but usually, and it's better for you to narrow it down to something specific. You already did that. Remember in your first speech, and I required you to do a culture community reference. And I kept saying over and over again, make sure you don't just say my people, which would be in general. You could be a lot of people you're talking about there. Me, I would be a white man, Unitarian Universalist. I'm not going to say my age, but you understand. It could be a lots of different things with my people. Am I talking about my fellow older, folks? I'm not going to say my age. Or are we talking, my fellow white people? Or are we talking about men? What are we talking about? People wear glasses. When I asked you to do the culture community reference, I kept saying be specific because that was narrowing down to a concrete example. All right. See how that works? It's important to note that and note the difference. And by the way, it doesn't mean you have to be one or the other, abstract or concrete. And like with the community college reference, you can be education, community college, and you can stop right there. It could be communication studies and stop right there, or you go down to our class. See how that works? Be mindful of the abstract concrete and how you use it. All right, let's get back to I know you're jonesing for more PowerPoint. Woo-hoo. The rest of this slide is just things that we're going to actually talk about more in the future, in which the language, the tone you take, be respectful, the word usage, are you using jargon or non-jargon, regionalism, and so forth, and then trying to be unbiased. And that's important because even if you're being persuasive, you should have the air of unbiased, that you're giving a truth. One of the things I did, and I think I did well when I worked in politics, or when I was I would be giving a political viewpoint, but I would do it in a way like I'm giving you the facts. And you do that by the language you use, the styles you use, and so forth. So be mindful of that. You want to try to look unbiased. So let's go into the next slide. Not really showing you anything in the background. Chapter 15. This is where a lot of the terms are. Right up here. Let's see, you can see my mouse. See my mouse? You're going to get at least 3 questions from this slide. At least 3 on your midterm. All right? Maybe another one, who knows? Know these terms. Understand these terms. They are different, memorable language styles. Your book right here, it uses you would think I would have this chapter open already. You would be understanding styles and memorable word structure. That's the word I was looking for. Memorable word structures. And they go into these different categories. And it's important to note these categories. There's figurative images. Figurative language is an official term. I haven't changed my slide. It's in your pages. I'm going to say it here in the video. Make sure you have figurative language on your terms to look up. It's in your book, but just to double check. That's something I need to correct. So I'm making the correction here, and I made it in pages, just to let you know. And then there's drama, and then there's cadence. by the way, the reason why I use figurative images before is because it's imagery in your head with the words you use. All right, enough of that. So there's divided in these three things. Now, the figurative language, the imagery you put in people's head with the words, is descriptions, it's connections. And the best way to remember that is you use an example of something that's familiar with your audience. A metaphor, a simile, personification. So and so is a snake. You're not saying so and so is a literal snake, it's a figurative snake. But people know what a snake is. They slide around. They're deceptive in nature. They hide and so forth. They're venomous. That's something people understand. So when you are declaring someone as a snake in personification, it connects with them. Same thing with the metaphor and simile. You are connecting your audience with something that they know and to something that they don't know, which is what you're doing in your speech. If you're informative, you're being informative on an issue that you're thinking the audience doesn't know. If you're being persuasive, you're trying to get the audience to do something they didn't think about doing before. So giving them an imagery of in figurative language of something that they're familiar with a metaphor, simile, or personification, is a great way for them to connect with it. All right. Let's go into the other two. Now, the figurative language part is heavy in your pages. Drama and cadence are not, because I said it there and I'm saying it now. This is something that I'm going to have you do. I'm going to do in the video, I mean, because this is more the language. Figurative language is something you prepare for in your outlines. It is something. It's a technique used in your outlines and so forth. You could prepare for it. Drama and cadence is when you are speaking. You could prepare for it, but when you enact it. That's why I wore these things. All right. I wore these things to get your attention on why does he have these strange goggles on his head. They're usually, if you have seen them before, they're usually in the back on top of that picture frame. The reason why I had this is to draw attention to me. I am wearing the mask and purposely have that where I can show off the goggles. I'm drawing your attention to with this. The same thing with your memorable word structures, your either drama and cadence. It is it's idea with drama. We're talking crisis rhetoric, omission, inversion. No, not inversion. I always get that one. No, inversion, suspension. Yeah, suspension. These are things that are storytelling techniques. They're markers in your speech. So when you're using this stuff, when you're bringing the drama, suspension, when you have that dramatic pause in your speech, did anyone notice the changes in the numbers after the department took out or took charge of the figures? You have the suspension and so forth. Or you wait to tell them. I'm going to say this to the end of my thought here, but let me lay it out. Or the basic one, an easier one to understand, is omission, where you don't tell them everything. You've done this before. You've done similes and metaphors before, but in a speech, an omission is when you leave something out in that story, which you've probably done before. And let me tell you about this date and all the stupid things he did or she did in that speech and in that date. And then you leave, but I didn't tell you this. That's an omission. When you're leaving stuff out to tell them later, that's a speaking technique. All right. The first one, figurative language, and we've already talked about this, really good for your attention getter, subpoint explanations. When it comes to drama, you're talking your main points, you're talking your thesis, if you do it right, you're talking yeah, your main point summaries, and your subpoints, of course. So these are just things that help increase attention to your speech. All right. Look up those terms. And I say this in the pages, and I'll say this right now. I expect you to know the terms. I don't expect you to try these in your speech. This is a little bit next step in public speaking stuff. If you want to try, only try one. Don't be a master of everything. Just try one, okay? And which ones do you try? The ones that you're most familiar with, the ones you feel most comfortable with, all right? Same thing with cadence. Cadence is easy. Have you ever had someone who repeats something to you? That's cadence. Cadence is voice. It's a selection of what they emphasize. It's cadence, it's repetition, it's parallelism, it's antithesis, it's alliteration, it's I never pronounce that word right. Try your best. It's ironic that I say it like that because it's about pronunciation. Anyways, on top, we always have fun. In class, we always have fun with trying to pronounce that word. Oh, God, dark in here a little bit. Anyways, cadence is the idea of emphasizing parts of your speech. You know, you with drama, you mix and match, and you do little things here and there, and try to bring attention. This one you're bringing attention just to how you say the words, and the easiest one is repetition. And let me tell you, this needs to be done. I'll say again, this needs to be done. That's repetition. You've done it before. You know people in your life who repeat themselves. That is a speaking everything. Why is my light being weird right now? So keep that in mind. Oh, see, now it goes back to normal. Keep that in mind. When you are speaking, again, if you ever try any of these, try just one of them. Don't try the whole different things, but realize that these are, I guess, quivers, arrows in your quiver. I don't know, is arsenal, tools in your shed. But these are there for you. Know the terms because it's going to be on your midterms and so forth. Then what are you going to do for your discussion participation is really easy one. Choose one of them and then write a explanation on how you would do it. Your next speech, you can't do coronavirus. So coronavirus is the topic again, where choose one of these and you might use coronavirus as an example because you can't use it as a topic for your informative or persuasive. But just how you would, use inversion or crisis rhetoric or antithesis or metaphor or something. Just say what you're going to use and then write out how you would use it in relation to the topic of coronavirus. As always, be appropriate. Don't say anything horrible and mean. And yeah. And by the way, again, this is it for until the midterm. So the next video is actually going to be really easy because you're just going to, it's like simple. So have a good one. Get out of stop share.